Well, I hope you've enjoyed this playlist, Who Wrote the Bible? It is a really good playlist. I think it's some of my best work. I've spent a lot of time studying the scriptures. Truth is, I love the Bible. Here's my Bible. See, look at this. I keep some really cool books in here. This is actually from the chapel, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in Jerusalem. This is just about Egypt. It's a Japanese kind of Buddhism. So I just keep some good gems in there. Then see, I just got lots of notes. Pages, as you can see, they're all marked up. I put my own tabs on it. This is a great book. The Keber Nagast was in the King James Version, and later they took it out. So, what is the recap on Who Wrote the Bible? So, if you've watched this playlist, you've seen this information, but I'm just going to recap it real quick. Okay, so first of all, the Bible historians have narrowed it down to what they call P1, P2, and P3. P stands for priest. Priest 1, priest 2, priest 3. They can't agree on who the priests are, but they all can agree that there was a priest, and there was 3 of them. At least 3 of them. So P1, they don't have a real good guess of who P1 is. They just know it was a priest. Moses did have some writings, but generally the first 5 books of the Bible, the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, are called the 5 books of Moses. The first 5 books of Moses were not really written by Moses. Like, he never sat down and wrote those books and said this will be a Bible. The idea of even writing everything down into a book didn't even really exist yet. There was the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but that was changed every time there was a new pharaoh and stuff like that, and they just didn't have that idea in their head that they should have a book and call it scripture and the Bible and the Torah and all that. But they did have some writings, and they did have some books. And the P1 was a priest that wrote down the story. But there was 2. There was the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So the king was from Judah, the tribe of Judah, and lived in Jerusalem. Judah was the largest tribe. The northern kingdom was all the tribes except Judah. The southern kingdom, the largest tribe, was of Judah, and Jerusalem was in the middle, and the king was from Judah. The priests were from Levi. And the tribe of Judah was the darker skinned ones, and it goes down into Ethiopia. We see with Solomon, who was from Judah, had made a baby with Queen of Sheba, and gave the land of Ethiopia to that baby named Menelik, who became the first king of a 3,000-year-old dynasty, the kings of Ethiopia. So he wouldn't have been able to give him Ethiopia unless it was his, and it was because the southern kingdom, Judah, it just goes all the way into Ethiopia, all the way into Africa, the Horn of Africa, and they're the darker skin. Okay, so then in the northern kingdom, they were like, lighter skin. They were like brown people, and there was some white people, the clean lepers. Okay, so the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom each had their own record, and they differed from each other. And we know this because later with P2, they combined the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom to make one book. So the P2 was during the days of King Hezekiah, and most scholars and Bible historians agree that P2 was Jeremiah. It's interesting to note that also the scriptures, the Bible itself, says that Jeremiah is the one with the pen and the one that wrote it. He had his scribe Baruch, and he's the one that compiled everything together at the king's request. So the king owns the Bible. It was his request that there be a book, and it's because there was a lot of political and about a lot of turmoil at the time, and the everything was threatened to not exist anymore. The religion, the kingdom, and so it was the Bible was compiled at first. They added in little verses and little scriptures here and there to define real well the job of the priests and of the kings. So that the people would need the priest and the king, and put it into a book, so that there would be set rules, and they could say, this is Scripture, the voice of God, and blah, and all the things that we know about Scripture. It was actually Jeremiah. So Jeremiah took the northern kingdom record and the southern kingdom record. A good example of this is the story of Noah, where he sends out a raven at first to see if there's land, and then later sends out a dove. The reason there's a raven and a dove is because the northern kingdom's record said there was a dove, and the southern kingdom said there was a raven. And so the story, when it's compiled together, he sends out a raven first, and later he sends out a dove. And there's just many of these two stories that you can tell that are put together into one book. So that was P2, and then P3, most agree, was Ezra during another time like that too. Ezra added just to comb through it, recompiled more what later become apocryphal and pseudepigraphical works, and the original compilation, the original series of books, everything added together. Added a few more extra verses. An interesting one he added was that every 5 years, I think it is, the people should go to Jerusalem and hear the Torah in their ears. So that way they would have a need for Jerusalem, that they would need to go to Jerusalem, bring an animal to be sacrificed to the priest, and then would need to hear the Torah read in their ears. And that just gave an extra need for Jerusalem. So the motivation for the Bible was political. It was so the king and the priest would have, to organize the need for the king and the priest and everything. So that's why the Bible was written. It was a bunch of records compiled, and that explains the inconsistencies and the things like that, because there are more than one records added together to make one. That's just the Old Testament. I have videos on this playlist about Jesus and the New Testament, which comes from the same history. So does the Quran. All Scripture really does. They don't write things down immediately. Anyway, the point is that that's the history of the Bible. I don't think it makes it worthless. I think everything's a perspective. And when put into proper perspective, it doesn't mean it's garbage, because that's where we come out of. And there's all this thought energy built up, and it's a part of us. It's a part of everything. And, just because these are the history and background of the Bible doesn't prove that it's worthless. It just proves in greater detail what it is.